The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, repurposed for the Global Financial Leaders Summit reception, was a breathtaking tableau of wealth and ambition. To merely be present in this room was a statement. To be recognized was currency. To command attention was power. Randall Croft didn't just command attention, he demanded it. To Randall Croft, the world was a hierarchical pyramid, with him comfortably near the apex. Below him were the deal makers, then the service providers, then the analysts and drones. And somewhere far, far down were the vast swathes of people who simply didn't matter. People who weren't plugged into the network, who didn't understand the game, who lacked the visible markers of wealth and power that, in his mind, were the only true indicators of worth. His contempt for that final category was vast and unwavering. Across the crowded ballroom, closer to the tall windows overlooking Central Park, stood Ibrahim Traoré. He wasn't part of the central, swirling mass of power brokers. His posture was calm, contained. His suit, while neat and appropriate, was clearly not the product of Savile Row or Milan's most exclusive ateliers. He wore it with quiet comfort, not as a performance. He wasn't surrounded by a protective ring of staff or associates. He held a simple glass of water, not champagne. His hands were clasped loosely behind his back, his gaze moving across the room with a quiet, observational intensity that seemed to absorb everything without judgment, or perhaps with a form of judgment that was entirely foreign to the values dominating this space. To Randall Croft's experienced, dismissive eye, the man radiated an aura of nothing. No flashy watch, no aggressive posture, no loud laughter, no eager acolytes. He looked to Croft utterly unremarkable, a statistical anomaly in a room populated by financial superheroes. As Croft, in the heat of explaining a complex leverage strategy, pivoted slightly, demonstrating a point with an expansive wave of his arm, his elbow firmly connected with someone standing slightly behind him. He stopped mid-flow, annoyed, his voice trailing off. He turned sharply, ready to deliver a brusque, dismissive apology, or simply glare the offending party into immediate retreat. His sharp, assessing eyes landed on Ibrahim Traoré. "Now watch it, pal," Croft said, his voice loud, cutting through the ambient noise, laced with patent irritation. He made no move to apologize for the contact, his focus already shifting from the physical bump to the perceived transgression of presence. This is a high-traffic zone. People here are doing actual business. Important business. He punctuated the words, actual business, and important business, with a meaningful glance around the room, encompassing the expensive suits, the animated conversations, the palpable aura of money being made. The implication was a blunt force trauma of social exclusion. You clearly don't look like you're doing actual business or any business that matters here. But Traoré, in his quiet, unhurried way, responded. His voice was calm, even, with a distinct, gentle African accent that was polite but held an unexpected undertone of quiet self-possession. "My apologies if I was in your path," he said, his gaze steady. "I was simply observing the movements within the market." Croft stopped turning completely, pulled back by the unexpected response, and even more by the phrase, observing the movements. He turned back fully to face Traoré, a look of mocking, amusement and growing disdain on his face. His associates leaned in slightly, sensing an unfolding spectacle. "Observing the movements?" Croft repeated, his voice dripping with condescension, as if the phrase itself was inherently ridiculous in this context. He let out a harsh, short laugh that drew the attention of people nearby. He gestured expansively around the room with his free hand, encompassing the swirling mass of financiers and deal-makers. "Buddy, people here aren't observing the movements. They're making the movements. They're driving the market. They're creating the flow, not just watching it." He paused, letting the full weight of his assertion land. You understand the difference between watching and doing in this world?" His tone was patronizing, slow, designed to make the man feel small and out of his depth. This isn't a public library or some kind of financial zoo for tourists. "This is where global capital converges," Croft continued, his voice rising slightly, now consciously drawing the attention of several nearby groups, turning the interaction into a public performance. He was enjoying this. The man's quiet dignity, his lack of visible status symbols, made him an easy, satisfying target. Where the levers of global finance are pulled, where fortunes are made and lost in the span of a trading day. Are you even in the market, pal? I mean, genuinely? Got a portfolio that moves the needle? Any significant positions? He gestured dismissively at Traoré's simple attire. Or are you just here looking for handouts? For crumbs from the table? The suggestion that someone at this elite summit reception was a mere supplicant looking for charity or a handout was a deeply insulting accusation designed to strip the man of any pretense of relevance. Because, frankly, based on your presentation, he swept his eyes over Traore again, and your talk about observing, you don't exactly look like someone who belongs in the room where the real money talks, loudly. But Traore didn't flinch. He remained standing calmly, meeting Croft's gaze with a steady, composed regard that held no sign of embarrassment, no anger, no visible reaction to the blatant, public mockery. Only a quiet dignity that seemed utterly impervious to Croft's verbal assault. His lack of the expected reaction, the fawning, the fear, the embarrassment, seemed to briefly short-circuit Croft's triumphant exit strategy. It was unsettling. I am indeed invested in the market, Traore replied again, his voice quiet but steady, utterly unaffected by Croft's escalating bluster and ridicule. His calm seemed to mock Croft's performative aggression. Significantly, I oversee a national market, among other responsibilities. Croft stared at him for a second, processing the reply, searching for the angle, the hidden meaning, the expected retreat. Finding none, finding only that same baffling composure, he felt a burst of something akin to disbelief so profound it was comical. A national market, he repeated, the phrase hitting him as the most absurd, pathetic attempt at sounding important he'd ever heard. It was so far beneath the scale of global finance he operated in, it struck him as genuinely hilarious. He threw his head back and let out a loud, booming, genuinely derisive laugh that cut through the ballroom's dwindling hum like a chainsaw through balsa wood. His associates, sensing their leader's true enjoyment, joined in, their laughter louder and less hesitant this time, a chorus of sycophantic amusement. Nearby conversations faltered as heads turned towards the source of the raucous mockery. Oh, a national market, Croft roared again, wiping a tear of exaggerated mirth from his eye. He pointed at Traore, his hand shaking slightly with feigned hilarity. That's rich! That is really rich! Get a load of this guy, thinks overseeing a national market is a flex in this room. He mimicked Traore's accent in a crude, exaggerated, deeply insulting way, leaning into the caricature of someone trying to sound more important than they were. Like you run a farmer's market? You the mayor of a small town, a street bazaar operator? He looked back at his associates, grinning widely, his face alight with the pleasure of the public takedown. He thinks talking about a national market makes him relevant here. Does he even know what a basis point is? Or how to leverage a non-performing asset? He was no longer just mocking. He was openly ridiculing, using Traore's simple, truthful statement as fodder for cruel jokes designed to maximize his own status at the other man's expense. Wiping his eyes again, the laughter subsiding but the smugness remaining, Croft turned his attention back to Traore, his face hardening again, the mocking amusement giving way to outright contempt. He stepped closer again, lowering his voice slightly, but injecting it with pure, cutting disdain, ensuring his associates and nearby listeners could still hear the final, crushing blow. Listen, overseer, Croft said, the word overseer delivered with maximum sarcasm, drawing it out as if it were a pathetic, meaningless title in his world. Let's be clear, this is the big leagues. We're talking multi-billion-dollar funds, managing sovereign wealth, orchestrating cross-border M&A, moving entire industries with the stroke of a pen. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh, confidential whisper that was ironically loud enough to carry. Your national market sounds quaint, truly, adorable even. Perhaps suitable for small-scale local investment. He paused, letting the deliberate insult hang in the air. But it's not global finance. It's not where the real power is wielded. And frankly, based on everything I've seen and heard from you, he swept his eyes over Traore again with utter dismissal. Someone who talks about observing movements and overseeing national markets in this room simply doesn't understand how global finance really works. You're punching way, way above your weight class just by being in here. He straightened up, pulling his shoulders back, his face set in a triumphant final expression. He turned his back on Traore completely, the ultimate gesture of dismissal, signaling that the interaction was over, and the man was beneath his further notice. All right, fellas, he said loudly to his associates, leading them away, his voice resuming its booming, confident tone. Enough time wasted on spectators. Let's go find someone who actually speaks the language of capital. There are deals to be made. Randall Croft walked away, his laughter echoing slightly, quickly resuming his conversation about market opportunities with his nodding associates, leaving Ibrahim Traoré standing alone near the window, publicly ridiculed and dismissed as an irrelevant amateur who didn't understand the real world of global finance, a man fit only for national markets and observing movements. Croft felt a familiar surge of triumphant satisfaction. He had put another nobody in his place, reinforced his own status as the man who knew everything and belonged everywhere, and provided his audience with a moment of shared, contemptuous amusement. He was the apex predator here, and everyone knew it. But as Croft and his entourage moved deeper into the room, resuming their important discussions of global capital, the atmosphere around them began to shift in a way that transcended the usual ebb and flow of networking. A ripple of hushed excitement, a palpable wave of recognition and respect, spread from the entrance, drowning out the general hum of conversations. Heads turned en masse towards the entrance, then followed a specific trajectory across the room. A figure of immense global stature, instantly recognizable from news broadcasts and international forums, was entering the reception. It was Christine Lagarde, the esteemed president of the European Central Bank, a woman whose decisions could shake continents and whose influence in global finance was absolute. She was accompanied by a formidable retinue of key economists and senior advisors, their presence radiating quiet authority. President Lagarde's gaze swept the room, acknowledging key figures from the world of finance and politics with professional courtesy. Brief nods, small smiles exchanged across the crowd. But then, her eyes landed on the periphery near the tall windows, on the quiet figure of Ibrahim Traoré, who had remained standing calmly in the spot where Croft had left him. President Lagarde stopped walking. Her expression, usually one of focused determination or diplomatic neutrality, softened into one of clear recognition and genuine respect. Without a moment's hesitation, she altered her path, moving directly, purposefully, through the crowded ballroom, cutting a path that bypassed the usual clusters of G7 finance ministers and major bank CEOs she typically gravitated towards. Her entire focus was on the man Randall Croft had just publicly, viciously mocked and dismissed as an irrelevant amateur. The room fell into an almost complete stunned silence. The kind of silence that only occurs when something truly significant, truly unexpected, is about to happen. Every eye followed the president of the ECB's unexpected trajectory across the floor. Randall Croft, mid-sentence about an upcoming IPO, felt the sudden, eerie silence. He paused, his confident voice trailing off, a frown creasing his brow, his internal monologue about the deal drying up on his tongue. What was Lagarde doing? And who, in the name of all that was profitable, was she walking towards with such singular focus? President Lagarde reached Ibrahim Traoré. She stopped directly in front of him. She didn't just offer a polite handshake. In a gesture witnessed by every single person in that silent, packed ballroom, a gesture that conveyed a level of respect that transcended standard diplomatic protocol and bespoke genuine admiration, she extended her hand and inclined her head deeply, a bow of profound deference. Her voice, clear, authoritative, and carrying the immense weight of her office, cut through the hushed space, reaching every ear. "Ah, Mr. President," President Lagarde said, her voice warm, respectful, and utterly devoid of any condescension. "President Traoré, what an immense pleasure and honor to see you here tonight. We were hoping our paths might cross. It is truly wonderful to have you present. Mr. President. President Traoré." The words hit Randall Croft like a physical blow from a wrecking ball, utterly demolishing the carefully constructed reality in his mind. His blood ran cold, then roared in his ears. His face, seconds before alight with arrogant satisfaction, went utterly slack, then drained of all color with sickening speed, turning a ghastly ashen white. His jaw dropped open, hanging there in utter, disbelieving horror. His eyes, wide with shock and absolute paralyzing dread, fixated on the unassuming man who was now calmly, gracefully shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with the president of the European Central Bank, one of the most powerful financial figures on the planet. Mr. President, the man he had just told was lost, underdressed, only there for the canapes, didn't understand global finance, wasn't playing in his league, and only oversaw a mere national market, was Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, a head of state, a leader responsible for an entire national economy, interacting with international financial institutions, negotiating with bodies like the IMF and the World Bank, attracting foreign investment, dealing with global trade agreements, operating at a level of financial reality, political consequence, and international standing that was not just above Randall Croft's insular world of private equity buyouts, but in a completely different universe. Croft's mind reeled, a dizzying, nauseating, and utterly horrifying replay of the last 5 minutes flashing before his eyes. Every single word he had spoken to Traore, every condescending remark, every mocking question, every arrogant dismissal echoed in his head with devastating clarity, amplified 1,000 times by the silent, watching crowd and the stark reality of President Lagarde's greeting. His own words, spoken with such certainty and cruelty, now sounded absurd, ignorant, and utterly irrevocably damning. He felt a wave of nausea. Are you even in the market? He was responsible for a national market, a member of the global economic system, a counterpart to heads of institutions like the ECB. Just here for the free canapes? He was a head of state, a peer of the most powerful figures at a global summit for leaders, not exactly a deal-maker's handshake. He made deals on a national and international scale that involve billions and affect millions of lives, deals that dwarf most private equity transactions, clearly not playing in our league. His league was the League of Presidents, the highest tier of global leadership, a league where figures like Lagarde operated as partners and counterparts, a league so far above Randall Croft's financial hierarchy it was unimaginable. Doesn't seem to understand how global finance really works. He operated at the intersection of national and international finance at the highest political level, a perspective, a depth of understanding that Croft, despite his billions, could never truly access or comprehend from his limited vantage point. I oversee a national market. He had stated the truth, and Croft had mocked it, revealing his own provincial, limited understanding of global power dynamics. Croft felt physically sick, the taste of bile rising in his throat. He hadn't just been rude. He had been monumentally, publicly, and viciously ignorant to a globally recognized leader, a peer of the president of the ECB, right in the middle of a room packed with the most influential people in finance and business. His words, intended to belittle Traore and elevate himself, were now the very instruments of his own spectacular, humiliating downfall. He was being forced to eat every single one of them, and they tasted like ash, like dust, like the bitter metallic tang of absolute self-inflicted failure. His associates, who had been laughing along with his mockery seconds before, had now taken several rapid steps back, melting away into the surrounding crowd. Their faces were a mix of stunned silence, horror, and calculated distance. No one wanted to be associated, even by proximity, with the man who had just committed such a breathtakingly arrogant and foolish blunder. Their loyalty extended only as far as his perceived power, and that power had just evaporated in a puff of his own hot air. Other attendees who had overheard the entire confrontation were now staring openly at Croft, no longer pretending not to notice. Their faces were a mixture of disbelief, discomfort, and in many cases, thinly veiled schadenfreude. The whispers that erupted throughout the ballroom were no longer about interest rates or M&A. They were solely focused on Randall Croft's stunning public disgrace. The man who thought he was the loudest, most important voice, the man who knew everything, had just been utterly silenced and exposed by the quiet presence of a president and the simple, respectful greeting of a powerful figure like Christine. Lagarde, President Lagarde and President Traore were now engaged in conversation, their interaction radiating an effortless authority and mutual respect that highlighted the sheer absurdity, the vulgarity, and the profound ignorance of Croft's earlier behavior. President Traore's quiet dignity, which Croft had so confidently mistaken for insignificance and lack of understanding, now felt like an immense, unshakable power, a silent rebuke to everything Croft represented. Croft stood frozen in the middle of the circulating crowd, a solitary, pale, and utterly pathetic figure, a living monument to shattered arrogance and self-inflicted ruin. His carefully constructed image of being an all-knowing, all-powerful titan of finance lay in absolute ruins, demolished entirely by his own loud, cruel mouth. He was the one who clearly didn't understand how things really worked, how true power and influence could manifest outside of a flashy watch and a condescending tone. He was the ignorant one, the provincial one, the one who was utterly out of his depth.